The question I want us to ask is, what is the news we need in order to flourish? Instead of just asking, what's the news we need? The in order to flourish part is important. And the answer that I like best might sound like heresy to traditional journalists, and as you saw from my bio, I'm not actually a journalist. I have, however, been a news junkie my entire life. I don't remember the last day that I went without reading some news, and probably a lot of you are the same. Here's what I think. I think that the news we need in order to flourish shouldn't just tell us what's going on in the world, but also what we can do about it. Now, consider this. The great promise of the Enlightenment is that you put information out there and society will improve, like magic. But currently, consuming the news or trying to every day in any sort of concerted fashion is like drinking out of a fire hose. There's so much news out there, and we read it, and we read it, and we read it, and to what end? I mean, do you feel smarter after you read it? Do you feel happier after you read it? Are you wiser for it? Or does it really just sort of serve to reinforce vague, widely held conclusions like the Middle East is in turmoil, and celebrities all tend to name their kids really bizarre things? I mean, as if their lives weren't going to be weird enough, right? So we grow up and we study classic literature, and we study history, and we study art, but we never at any point receive any formal education or instruction on the insane capacity that news has to influence our sense of reality and our lives. And it's somehow been deemed more important for our youth to grow up and understand motifs in The Great Gatsby and in Ulysses' Odyssey than to understand the front page of the New York Times, or to understand the difference in coverage between Al Jazeera and the BBC and Fox News, for instance. Now, George Hegel, who's the first German philosopher I'll be quoting today, had a theory that societies become modern when news replaces religion as our central source of guidance. But what are the implications of that when, for one, we've never as a society been taught to navigate the redundancies and the inconsistencies and the perversion that news sells us, beyond being told occasionally, don't always believe what you read in the news, which is frankly not helpful. And then two, when trying to stay informed is essentially a masochistic pursuit. I mean, every time you turn on the news or every time you read a newspaper, you're seeing terrible stories about things all over the world that just, they make you feel awful. It's cruel to yourself to do it almost, and honestly, a lot of it's fairly useless. And it's not that news is all totally bad or that it's wrong. It serves a very, very useful purpose in our lives, but it's just constantly failing to render any of the information it's giving us effective as any sort of guidance, because it doesn't move us, right? I mean, you've probably all seen pictures like this in the news. You turn it on, ISIS, right? It's something that is constantly being shown to us. But we don't really have any more information, so it doesn't make you a bad person if you read about mass atrocities that are being committed all over the world and don't really feel anything, feel numb to that, but cry your eyes out for an hour during The Fault in Our Stars over two people that never existed. Maybe I'm the only one who did that. Okay. Now, before I sort of depress all of you too much, I do want to give a couple of examples of some types of news that I feel is doing a good job. This, folks, is the future of news. He, if you've never seen him or seen his show, is it's called Last Week Tonight. It's an HBO show. I highly recommend. Go home, look it up on YouTube when you get back. And he's doing two key things. The first is he's making what is important interesting. That's huge. The second is that in some of his shows and his segments, he's actually giving a call to action at the end of it. And these calls to action, in some cases, are actually spurring action, which is no small feat. I mean, we're lazy. It's just the reality of it. He's actually succeeding in doing this, and he's able to because he's brilliant, and he's funny, and he's engaging. And if it sounds like I have a little bit of a fangirl crush on him, it's because I do. And I promise you guys probably will by the end of this as well, so bear with me. So here's an example of why what he's doing works. In June, he dedicated a whole 16 minutes of his 30-minute segment to net neutrality, which is essentially the basic principle that the internet, as it is, works, and it should stay the same. It's a remarkably level playing field. Everyone can get the same information at the same rate. And it's an important topic. It's one that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in the US, has considered trying to change and trying to give an advantage to cable companies who pay more money in order to make a profit. I was going to play a couple of clips from the FCC hearings, but I would probably put you to sleep, and then if I depressed you and put you to sleep all in the same TED Talk, I think it would be the worst in history. So what I'll do is just sort of let John Oliver tell you why it's important or how it's important.
It's not just anti-corporate hippies who think that abandoning net neutrality is a bad idea.
The net neutrality movement is leery of big corporate players, but in this debate, it's on the same side as some of them.
Google, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon all signed on to this letter supporting net neutrality.
What's being proposed is so egregious, activists and corporations have been forced onto the same side. That's basically Lex Luthor knocking on Superman's apartment door and going, listen, I know we have our differences, but we have got to get rid of that arsehole in apartment 3B. He's too loud, Soup. He's just too loud.
I mean, be still my heart, right? No, but I mean, are you somewhat convinced now? There's activists, there's corporations on the same side fighting this. That's a rare occurrence. Now, in the last couple minutes of this segment, he dedicates it to a really amazing, cheesy, inspirational background music call to action, specifically to everyone who's watching, but also the internet trolls. He says, this is the moment you've all been waiting for. Go onto the FCC website and write comments. Do it. Focus your useless or your indiscriminate rage in a useful direction, I think is what he said. And this is what happened. The FCC's website literally crashed from the amount of comments that it got and from the traffic that it got. Now, this could never have happened if he hadn't given that call to action and if he hadn't, for the first 15 minutes of the segment, made what was important interesting. Because, and here's a pro tip, if you ever want to get away with something evil, put it in something boring. Now, what if these calls to action weren't just silly and weren't just irreverent and related to sort of first world problems like this? I mean, think about if all news was linked to action. Imagine how a couple of things would be different in the way that you read news and consume it. For one, if on every story about a natural disaster, there was a way for you to donate or to give money to someone who was affected. Easily. Imagine if on every story about a piece of legislation or a representative or elective, there was a way to register to vote or to contact that representative. Imagine if on every cat video you watched, there was a link to a local shelter you could volunteer at or you could adopt from. You could make your own cat videos. What if news agencies and media teams spent as long trying to determine potential solutions as they did on fact-checking and on sourcing their stories? And they gave readers a way to get involved instead of just feeling totally helpless. Now, technology and the power that technology has lent us makes this completely feasible. Right? Technology is the great equalizer. It gives us, at the tip of our fingers, quite literally, the power to enact global change. Now, this is the premise that my company, RYOT, was built on. The idea that no matter who you are or where you are, you can make a difference. Now, the name is actually based on the Martin Luther King Jr. quote, "A riot is the language of the unheard." Because historically, if you're a marginalized member of society, the only way to be heard is to rise up and to create chaos. RYOT, as we spell it, which is with a Y, is actually a Hindi word that means peasant or farmer. It's the lowest caste member. Now, that inspired our goal from the start, to give a voice to the voiceless and setting out to be the first breaking news site that links every single story to an action. You know, in the case of Typhoon Haiyan, for instance, that hit the Philippines in November, every single story that we posted, we linked very quickly to a donation that we set up through RYOT Foundation, which was actually founded before the company itself was incorporated, so that we could figure out where it was most needed and then disperse it. Now, we raised $100,000 in just a few weeks from donations from readers. That was enough to buy medical supplies, to buy clean water and get it to them. And my favorite is to rebuild a fleet of fishing boats for fishermen who'd lost their livelihoods and their homes. There's a fleet of fishing boats in the Philippines now that have RYOT painted on the side. It's something I'm so proud of. And I know now that I need to address the elephant in the room, which is probably something that's been in the back of a lot of your minds because it's something that we have been asked in interviews and in conferences, which is, how do you consider yourselves true news in the traditional form or traditional sense of the word when you're giving action on every story? And that, by definition, is not practicing objective journalism. It's not. And I'm going to answer it in two parts. The first part is, we're a team of humanitarians and storytellers and journalists. And we see it as our duty to not only inform our readers, but to also empower them. And the second part of that answer is, that question that we're asked and the healthy skepticism that prompts it presupposes too great a difference between the codes of ethics of journalists and of humanitarians. Now, I think people still recall many, the classic example, which is the story behind this photo, which most, if not all of you, have seen. The story goes that the photographer Kevin Carter, who was reporting in Sudan on the famine in 1994, snapped this picture of a child who was trying to get to a feeding center right as a hooded vulture landed nearby. He says he took the picture and left because it was his job title. And he'd been told pretty explicitly not to touch anyone or anything for fear of contracting disease. And tragically, he won the Pulitzer Prize and committed suicide 3 months later. It was all too much. And many still maintain that journalists cannot intervene with the subjects that they're reporting on. And there are obvious problems with intervention if you're taking a traditional approach to reporting. But the first tenet of the current code of journalist ethics states, seek the truth and report it. Now, nowhere does it say that that duty ends at reporting who, what, when, where, and why. And there's a quote from the second German philosopher that I'm bringing in today, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that says, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. And I think that that's something that journalists and humanitarians would both agree on. And I think to a large extent, it's probably why most of them go into their chosen professions. So the only real disagreement, if any, as I see it, in where that duty to report the truth ends. Now, I speak with journalists regularly who battle and struggle with this very question: can I be a journalist and an activist? And I think the answer is an emphatic yes. And here's how. Journalists have the opportunity, and even the duty, I would say, to empower as they report, and to give readers the opportunity to be activists and humanitarians, even if the journalists themselves can't intervene. Now, if there's a global tragedy or there's something terrible that happened locally, and there's a way to ameliorate the situation or to ensure that it never happens again, then giving readers a way to take action and a way to do that is a part of the solution to improve the news as a source of guidance. Now, the first step, and what I see as the future of news, and what I hope is the future of news, is making what's important interesting, as I showed with John Oliver. That's a necessary step. To combat evil, it is necessary for journalists and reporters to not only make their stories honest and truthful, but also interesting enough that people hopefully, ideally, feel compelled to get involved. Now, the second step is giving the opportunity to act and the direction in which to do so alongside the news. Without both steps, it's incomplete. If there is a call to action, but it's not interesting, as we saw in the case of our Typhoon Haiyan articles, when we were just reporting on, here's how many people died, here are the areas that it hit, readers weren't turning into donors on those stories. They weren't compelled to do so. It was the intimate portraits of individuals and of families that had lost everything, and people being able to empathize with that through videos and through photos that made them want to donate and made them want to help. That first piece is so critical. And then, alternately, if you have a story that is really compelling or something that's beautifully written and you feel like you want to do something, but you have no idea how, that also is incomplete. It's not going to get the job done of helping our society flourish. So Here is what I desperately want the future of news to be. But as consumers of the news, we also need your help to make this a reality, because your clicks and your viewership make an impact. It may seem like a passive behavior or activity that you sort of do without thinking, but it is actually creating the economy of news that you're being shown. And to start, don't click on or don't engage with news that makes you feel helpless and that makes you feel sad and mad. Give your precious attention to the news sources that you trust and that are making you feel better about the state of humanity and not worse. And so I'll leave you with a question, too. Imagine that you're reading a news story about someone who needs your help, someone that needs help. There's a natural disaster, there's a disease, there's something, and you have a way of easily and immediately having an impact on their life. Wouldn't you want to do that? And flip it. Imagine it's you that's in need. Wouldn't you want the rest of the world to not only know what was going on, but also what they could do to help? Thank you.